We're here as part of the Installer Net Zero Festival with Martyn Bridges from Worcester. How are you doing, Martyn?
Yeah, I'm very good, Joe. Thank you. Yeah, and you, I hope.
Yeah, no, all good this end. We've got Martyn here today to talk about decarbonisation of heat and net zero. Martyn, for those who might not know who you are, can you explain a bit about yourself and your background, please?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I'm Martyn Bridges, Technical Director at Worcester Bosch. I've been in this industry since I left school, 1978. I don't know anything else really other than this, so I'm like 42 years in it. I was an apprentice heating engineer, installer, finished the apprenticeship after 5 years, then carried on working for 3 further years as an installer, and then joined Worcester Bosch in 1985. So I'm a lifer there, you might as well say. I've just, over the years, have picked up various trade association roles as well. I chair the boiler technical panel for the HHIC. I'm on the board of Offtech, the board of the CIPHE, and the Hot Water Association as well, and various other trade associations I input into. So it's sort of general industry practitioner.
I'd say expert, but you're an expert yourself. You would probably seem a bit on the braggy side. So we're going to kick this. I'm going to kick this off with a hard one or a big one. So just how difficult is it, or is it going to be, to decarbonise heat for the UK?
Yeah, that's it. Well, it is the hardest of all the net zero bits to hit. Transportation, things like that are making great inroads into it. But when you've got to go into somebody's private home and now either encourage, incentivize, or perhaps even enforce them to make their home more efficient with insulation or low carbon heating systems, it's a big thing to do, and I don't even know whether you could legally do that. Actually, I'm no expert on this, but I noticed in Scotland there are targets they've set for a trigger point almost, that when you sell your home or when you rent your home, it must hit a certain energy performance certificate rating, and it's not far away. They're suggesting that every home which goes into that sale or rent should have an EPC rating of C, band C, from 2023, 2024. You know, it's very soon. So that's quite, quite brave and quite ambitious, and who knows, perhaps it might be easier to do in Scotland. There's less houses, and they've been building very well constructed properties in terms of insulation levels for years. But yeah, to do that in the UK, very tough indeed. And also, we're so reliant on the gas infrastructure, of course. We've got a brilliant infrastructure in terms of connectivity. 85% of all homes in the UK are connected to the gas grid. I read recently there's 136,000 miles of pipework under the ground, zigzagging all over the place, with a public asset value of £40 billion if you had to start to do it again. So, you know, we've got a habit, a behaviour, we've got used to connecting our homes to the gas grid. So to actually not use that is very tough indeed. Hence the reason, I suppose, that the governments are quite keen on perhaps using a greener gas, either in a blended form for a few years, but ultimately a carbon-free gas such as hydrogen is featuring very strongly in their thoughts. Alternatively, you of course have heat pumps, which is another favoured technology. But again, that's a tough call when you've got something like 17 million homes with a combi boiler in them and no hot water storage cylinder, to go into somebody's private home and say, well, I'm very sorry, you can't replace that combi with another combi. You must fit a heat pump and find a home for a hot water storage cylinder. So all those conundrums and many more make this a really tough and hard thing to attack and achieve.
It's a good point though, when you mentioned like dates like 2024, 2025, they're not that far away when you think the the life, like a warranty of a boiler at the minute can be up to 10 years, can't it? So that's kind of one life cycle of a boiler. So what we do now might be the last time you can fit that, because in 10 years time there's going to be something different going in.
Yeah, BEIS, various meetings I attended with BEIS, the government department in charge of this decarbonisation issue. They understandably have started saying, right, the very last boiler of a carbon source can't be fitted any later than 2035. They last 12 to 15 years, so we want those boilers not running in 2050. So yeah, that focuses the mind a bit more. That's 15 years if that was to follow through. Yeah, it certainly creeps up on you ever so quick.
So you mentioned hydrogen, and you mentioned hydrogen blend. So looking at the things that we can do here and now, if I think, is it 20% or is that too high that current combi boilers could run with hydrogen, which would save immediately that sort of carbon, but using the same gas grid, using the same boilers?
Yeah, we've most manufacturers as well test their boilers on a 22% blend of hydrogen. So running on 20% isn't or shouldn't be a great issue for boilers which are perhaps in the last 20 years of manufacture. Anything pre that, no, that would they haven't been tested for use with a blended hydrogen, so they wouldn't be suitable. The Kiel University trial, which some people may be aware of, is trying to find evidence really that this is absolutely the case. They've got some 140 boilers running on a 20% blend of hydrogen at the university, on the campus, at various homes where the students live and other parts of the building. Regrettably, because of the virus situation at the moment, that test has stopped. But it will return once people can enter properties and be closer together than 2 meters in terms of the maintenance issues. But we have no expectations of problems. The boilers were all tested thoroughly at a test facility in Cheltenham, the Kiel test facility, before it went into the universities. They just wanted to run trials to see if the seals and things like that were okay with these slightly hotter temperatures. And everything was fine there. It ignited okay. The flame formation and pattern was okay. We could sense the flame was all right. So we had no issues with laboratory testing. So obviously the logical thing is now try it in reality in properties in a controlled environment. So there are engineers there all the time. They've converted the kitchens and things like that to hydrogen as well. And it was interesting, there was a visit there by the BBC journalist Roger Harrabin just before Christmas, and he was asking the ladies who were working in the canteen if they could notice any difference with the oil, for instance, they were frying chips in. It sounds a silly question, but they couldn't tell that there was any difference in the gas they were using. And that's what you want. So that's utopia, isn't it? So your boiler is now 20% more, or rather less polluting in carbon emissions, and you don't even know it's doing it. That's a lovely achievement. So yeah, 20% is probably the maximum we'd be able to do with the current boilers as well. Anything more than that, then we will hit issues. We will have problems. You could go a tiny bit more, but not really much more than 22-23%. So they've sealed it at 20. There have been days at Kiel where it hasn't been running on 20. It started originally at sort of 7 or 8% and then gradually worked upwards. But 20 it was running at when it had to momentarily close the trial. Once you get over that, though, you will have to design a bespoke boiler to run on hydrogen. It's difficult or virtually impossible to sense the flame is alight with a flame rectification circuit like we use in the present boilers. So we have to use PV cells and things like that to counteract that, really, to test or check that the flame is present in a different method to what we use today.
So is that what you would think would be a good idea for kind of a bridging method now, like you said. So you could save yourself 20% of the CO. The end user doesn't see any difference. The installer won't see any difference, and that could happen almost relatively quickly, couldn't it?
Yes. In fact, the recent document that the government have published on funding for clean heat, there's been a number of announcements in recent, even today, but about 3 weeks ago, they published a document on how they propose to spend the £100 million that the Chancellor had set aside in his February budget to encourage the take-up of low-carbon heating. And some of that funding has been allocated to greening the grid. So if people want to invest in an anaerobic digestion system, which would take waste, either food or even waste from animals, etc., and create methane gas from it and inject that into the grid, then there is a reward and incentive for doing so. So that is happening today. We have biomethane being injected into the grids from around about 140, I think, anaerobic digestion systems dotted around the country. But regrettably, that would be lovely if that could take over the entire gas supply, but there will never be enough of that. So we'll end up probably with a blend for a period of time of natural gas or methane, biomethane from anaerobic digestion systems, and probably an element of hydrogen as well. And then one day it depends how policy goes, but I would imagine they would have to switch the entire gas supply then to a carbon-free gas, to which hydrogen looks the most likely contender for that.
And what about oil? Because for off-grid properties, and obviously Worcester manufacture oil boilers as well, when they talk about greening up oil, is that possible?
It is possible, and it's. I get the feeling that the government is somewhat impatient on off-gas grid situations. That was the first target in their minds, to decarbonise off-gas grid properties, which is mainly oil and some LPG.
Why is that? Because I would imagine that that's harder to do, or am I wrong?
I think you're right. I think those homes are more likely to be older properties in the shires, down country lanes where you can't get a broadband connection, the electricity supply is a bit indifferent, you turn on too many appliances and the trip switch throws, or so to actually substitute oil to an electric heat pump in some of those locations is not sensible. I've got some colleagues in the Netherlands where this took place, and they've had power outages and things like that because they're trying to draw too much electricity from an already exhausted grid or section of that grid for that particular shire or village. So I don't know why they've got oil so firmly in their sights, more so than any other area. Probably because there's less of them. There's probably around 2 million homes, I believe, not on the gas grid. About 1.5 of those would be on oil, and the remainder on some sort of like biomass or electricity or LPG. But they seem impatient in doing it, and the what's called the Clean Growth publication. That's right, Clean Growth Strategy, November 2018 was published. That set a target of 2025 banning oil from new build properties, and by 2032 banning the sale of oil to any property. So that's a bit short. New build, I don't think oil troubles new build anyhow. We certainly sell very few boilers, if any, into new build properties. I think if there are oil installations going into new build properties, it's probably for an Arga cooker. It's more of a fashion cooking type appliance rather than a genuine heating need. But they seem to be quite dismissive of oil, and some of the proposals that we have put forward as an oil industry to BEIS have not, I don't think, been listened to very thoroughly at all. There are alternatives to kerosene. Kerosene is the traditional heating oil. It's also the fuel you use in aviation, in air flights, etc. The alternatives we put forward, we couldn't get enough oil, or rather bio oil, from the worldwide market to substitute the 4 million tonnes that we need every year in the UK. But we put forward a blend. Why don't we go for a blend, let's say a 20 or 30% blend of bio oil, and then let the production build up, and then perhaps 5 years later go for a 50% blend, and then 5 years after that 100% blend. That seems to be accepted and allowed with gas, but with oil it's a sort of that's not really what it's not really ambitious enough for us. So it's slightly disappointing that and this paper I mentioned moments ago, this funding for clean heat, the 100 million quid, oil isn't in there. In fact, you could argue that that paper is essentially an oil boiler scrappage scheme, and you are eligible for £4,000 of funding if you take out your oil boiler and replace it with a heat pump. And again, I've nothing against heat pumps. We sell them. It's a great technology, but the circumstances have to be pretty good for a heat pump to run successfully. And many of these older properties that oil are in, that's a struggle. They're leaky, they're drafty. Oil boilers tend to be quite high in output as well. The smallest one that we sell is of roughly 14 kilowatts in output. 12 to 18 kilowatts is its full range. So fitting a heat pump instead of a 12 to 18 kilowatt boiler would be probably a 3-phase electricity supply required for that. And there aren't many homes with that. So all their ambition in removing oil from the market as soon as they can is great. But when you dig into how can you do it, it's pretty tough. We are working on new technologies for oil. There is a version of bio, which is hydrogenated vegetable oil. So that would come from a sustainable source. I can understand why there was some fight back against the bios of years ago that we've used, because much of those were coming from virgin crops, some of it from waste cooking oils and stuff like that. But it isn't right to grow crops to essentially burn them afterwards for heat. I can get that. That certainly is not quite right. But there are other ways of doing it from landfill and things, and we just need time to sort of trial these things and get them to work. But I don't get the same patience being applied to oil as we do with gas.
It is odd, isn't it? When I went to one of the Offtech AGMs, and I found it really interesting when they just describe oil as a way of transporting energy. So it's energy that's liquefied in a tank, and then that's it. When you think about it like that, you think, yeah, it's really good. It's the same with gas. When you think about oil, though, you think, oh, dirty fossil fuel, get rid. And you don't have the same thing with gas, and you don't have the same thing with electricity. Like I was having a discussion on Twitter the other day about if you put E in front of anything, like e-scooter, it sounds really good. It sounds clean and trendy. But yeah. I mean, even you be able to tell me better, but even the electricity that we're producing at the minute is still 25% fossil fuel.
We had a run this summer where it's, there have been many days where it's come solely from renewables. But when you hit the depths of winter where you really need heat, then the majority of the supply then comes from the grid. It's from gas power stations, gas-fired power stations. Coal is virtually gone now. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you really need it, gas is still required to generate this electricity. So it's not quite as carbon-free as some of the headlines you read. But great inroads have been made, no question. With offshore, onshore wind, things like that, have really contributed enormously to the carbon intensity of electricity coming down, massively. So oil, though, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's got a poor reputation, and I can see some of that because that, back in the 60s, if you had central heating in your home, it was quite likely going to be oil. And yes, the oil was generally gas oil or diesel, and you could see smoke on the flue terminals and things. It wasn't anywhere near as refined as it is today. But no, most people with an oil boiler today are delighted with them, and it's a very good technology. But yeah, it does have a high carbon intensity comparably to other fuels. And yes, we do accept that we can't go on, but please give us a chance and let us try and decarbonise the fuel rather than force upon a homeowner a heating system which may not really be best suited for them.
I think one of the, obviously as a magazine, we're completely agnostic to all the technologies. And I think what we all agree with across all the sectors is it's going to take a mix. But I think what we can all agree with as well is that no matter what the heat source or the heating system, we're going to have to try and tackle wastage in anything. So what do you think about things like smart controls, water treatment, deaeration, magnetic filtration, all that sort of things? What can the industry do to kind of help promote that as best practice, get those messages to installers and government to try and do like what they've kind of done with Boiler Plus and kind of mandated that you have to have these things as part of your heating system to right now, lower emissions and lower your fuel bills?
Yeah, I quite agree. Particularly, let's take water treatment first of all. We all know it should be done, but quite often it doesn't get treated. The system doesn't get flushed, cleansed, inhibited. You could go even further. Some installers are very diligent and use, different water almost. There is a VDI paper from the German Engineering Association which advocates demineralized water, I think it is, in heating systems, and that is a really admirable thing to see happen. But the reality of doing that in the 6,000 boilers that get installed every day is probably unlikely. But yeah, no question, biggest issues we have with our boilers is call-outs because of sludged up hot water heat exchangers, pumps, diverting valves, automatic air vents, etc. There are regulations and policies and things in place. There's British standards in place for flushing and cleansing of systems. That's referenced in the Domestic Heating Compliance Guide, which is the second tier of the building regulations. So if you follow that trail of legality down, then in theory it's already a legal requirement to flush and cleanse the heating system. But I fear we're going to hit a situation before long when recession kicks in, money gets tighter, jobs get tighter in terms of competitiveness, that we tend to hit these cycles where unfortunately that certain things get overlooked because you have to remain competitive to actually eat to get the job. So we're probably going to be entering a situation before you know it where heating systems won't be as flushed and cleansed as frequently as they are today. But there's enough equipment out there to make it easier. Probably some of the factor is that homeowners just don't see it. They struggle to see the benefit of an installer quoting for the flush and cleanse of a system. They're given misleading advice by perhaps others saying, oh, you don't need that, I didn't have that on my house, there's no need for that. I think they're trying it on. It's a difficult one for the installer to convince the homeowner who has a slight amount of knowledge or reads up on the internet that this really will benefit you. I remember some test work being done at, again, the same test house I mentioned earlier in Cheltenham, where they compared the efficiency of a heating system with a sludged up water quality against a clean heating system, and it was a 6% difference in efficiency. So, you're buying a condensing boiler, a Band A condensing boiler, which is on a dirty system, and if you take those figures, it was operating at a Band C level of efficiency. So 6% of your fuel bill is a significant amount of money.
Yeah,
I would like to see that enforced. We are putting online before long, hopefully before the end of the year, there is a digital version of the benchmark scheme going online. Presently, it's a paper format in the back pages of the installation instructions the installer's asked to complete this, but that's it. It stays then with the end user generally. If it was to go online, then digitally you'd have to complete the form. And when it came to questions such as flushing and cleansing of heating systems, if you haven't filled out the fields for that, then you won't be able to go any further. You won't be able to register the boiler with the manufacturer. You won't be able to register the boiler with Gas Safe for building control compliance. So in theory, that becomes almost an illegal installation that way. The digital benchmark version as well is going to be asking for an annual water efficacy check. So various water treatment manufacturers have created a universal test kit which will test the strength of the inhibitor or the cleanliness of the water in the heating system. And on every annual boiler service, this benchmark digital checklist has to be completed. And again, you would have to acknowledge that you've checked the water efficacy and it is up to the standards required. So we are doing little bits as industry to try and tighten this procedure down, but consumer education is a big one. They physically can't see it, so they believe or misbelieve perhaps that it's not necessary.
But then a digital benchmark sounds a lot more like an MOT, and when I put my car in for an MOT, I don't look through if it says it's failed, you don't go, oh, why is it failed because of this? You have to do it. So that it takes it out of your hands as a consumer, because as a consumer, when I put my car in, I want it to have no faults, and I want to carry on driving for as little money as it costs. But that you have to change the tires because otherwise you're driving illegally, and it has to have this and it has to have this. So is that the kind of the crux of it? Is that it is going to have to come down to some sort of enforcement on the consumer end?
Yeah, the health and safety executive, who we asked to enshrine this in some sort of law, are very supportive of it, but that they are under some instruction not to put any more legalities and barriers in front of people. So they're going to underwrite it and state that this is a very good thing. They're going to add their branding to it. So that's pleasing to see. They are hoping that commercially it will just be part of the requisite for when you buy a house. Your solicitor will ask for the full service history of the boiler. And then it's down to your choice, of course, as to whether you continue to buy the house or not. But when it's online and it has to be registered, and it helps a little bit, of course. Now we've got these long warranties with manufacturers. Most manufacturers, in fact, all the manufacturers will, if that annual service has not been undertaken, then that warranty is unlikely to continue until that service has taken place. And the plan is that the homeowner gets reminded, please contact your installer to get a service of your boiler, otherwise your warranty will be lapsing. So we're doing all the commercial things we can, but consumer education, I guess they're just blind to it. Everybody tried. I remember Fernox back in the 80s, they used to advertise in what was the News of the World magazine the benefits of Fernox water treatment in a heating system.
I think I saw a Fernox TV ad as well from the 80s or 90s recently.
Yeah, they was a brave thing to do, because most consumers are just not interested in their heating system in the slightest. It's only important when it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
So to actually spend money on that was a very brave thing to do, but it's a continual thing as well. You have to constantly remind them. But the commercial pressure of long warranties and the fear perhaps of losing that warranty if you don't have it serviced, if you don't have the water treated correctly, that might have more impact than perhaps we've had up till now. On to your other point about smart controls. Yeah, they are taking off and have done for the last 4 or 5 years. We obviously sell a range of smart controls. I'm never really sure as to whether the ability to contact the heating system via your phone or your iPad actually consumes more energy though. I would rarely turn my boiler off if I was going to be coming home later than expected, but I quite frequently turn it on if I'm on a train or something like that, and I'm thinking, God, I'm earlier than I thought. When I get home, the heating won't be on, the house will be a bit cold. I'll turn it on from my phone, so it's nice and warm when I get home. Yeah, I think that you're more likely to incur more energy loss from more energy usage rather from the internet connectivity than not. But the other facets of the smart control, the load compensation, weather compensation, connecting to ETRVs, that definitely contributes to energy saving merits of the system. It lowers the flow temperatures of the boiler when it can, makes it condense more. You can isolate rooms you don't use with ETRVs. So yeah, they are great for that purpose, but the internet bit, very useful, but I'm not really sure people turn off their boiler if they're coming home later than expected. They're more likely to bring it on and use more energy.
Yeah, I'd like to see a study, if anyone does like a behavioural study on that, like whether the comfort level then means you use more energy because it's so easy, or do you start becoming more aware of it? So do you see what I mean? It would be very interesting.
It would be. We did a small trial of that. It wasn't that useful. It was with some university students at Worcester, and we donated smart heating controls to 3 or 4 landlords who had gangs of students in their properties. And you can connect, I think it's 11 devices to our Bosch Easy Control. So the 11 residents in this home could turn the heating on or off. But they weren't really interacting with it. It's not interesting enough for them. It would be better in an individual like you or I, our own home. We are paying the gas bill. That's where it's a bit different, and you might have more of a vested interest in adjusting things.
Yeah, when I was a student, your day and weeks are very different to like when you're working kind of in the real world, even in any job. But yeah, that probably I wouldn't have said that it would have been the best like thing to do to do it with students, but it'd be interesting with families, or even people who work nights and all that. Like you'd have to do it with different ones, but that I'd be really interested in that.
Yeah, it's we haven't done it, but you're right, it should be done. We might find answers there that we don't actually see as well. But it is the way of the world, and particularly now they're connected to these home automation systems like Alexa. It's great just to bark an order at that device and get it to turn lights on, central heating up, down, whatever. It is very, very convenient.
So we'll touch now on the hydrogen economy and hydrogen, like you touched on earlier, like 100% or very high percentage, and hydrogen boilers, because this is something that Worcester Bosch have been pioneering and calling for a couple of years, haven't you? So where do you think we are with that?
I'm very positive about it nowadays. We were encouraged to design a boiler that was capable of burning 100% hydrogen, but the first one we did, it could do that, of course, but then Bayes then thought, well, actually, there could be some issues here. And they were taking Leeds, the city of Leeds, as perhaps a shining light of where we could initially make that the first city connected to a hydrogen grid. And then the recognition, there's something like 57,000 properties, I think it was, in Leeds, that a good chunk of those would have had a new boiler within the last few years. So we're now going to go into 57,000 homes, and the small chunk of them who's had a new boiler, and say, I'm very sorry, but that 3-year-old boiler you've got, we now need to throw that away, and you need to buy a hydrogen one instead. So that isn't good for a start. A perfectly good boiler in the bin. That's not very environmentally friendly at all. So the position was changed, the plan was changed. Well, is it possible you could make a hydrogen-ready boiler? A boiler that would burn on natural gas all of its life, if necessary. But if hydrogen does come along, just a small couple or 3 components could be changed, and there you have it, a boiler which is now burning hydrogen. So that's what we did, and ourselves and one or two other manufacturers have achieved the same result. So there are constant sort of press briefings by the government. There's only last week the the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Hydrogen, had an audience with the Energy Minister, who was very positive about hydrogen and hydrogen ready. He mentioned Worcester Bosch, actually, it was quite flattering. But yeah, I get the feeling, and I mentioned it earlier before we actually started recording this, we even had the Chancellor of the Exchequer at Worcester today, Rishi Sunak, who saw the hydrogen ready boiler and was equally as positive and glowing about it. It wholly makes sense to me that you should have a date in your mind, if you're a government minister, to mandate hydrogen-ready boilers are the only boilers you can fit or put onto the market from a certain date. They're no more, or when they're in volume, they'll be more or less the same price as a natural gas boiler. And all of a sudden, at a rate of 1.5, 1.6 million a year, you're self-populating the market in readiness for hydrogen to come along. So after 10 years, you'd have 16, 17 million homes with a hydrogen-ready boiler in them. You've only got another 5 or 6 million to do, and then you've got the entire country ready and poised for hydrogen to start entering their properties. And it's good news as well. There's much of the hydrogen being generated is from electrolysis as well, so it's very environmentally friendly. We do know that in the early stages of hydrogen, if we were to convert the entire country, then we wouldn't be able to do that from a renewable source. It would be the steam reformation of methane, of natural gas, and the capture of the carbon. So that's not quite as great a news, but at the point of use, it would be 100% free of carbon. So it's safe, it's environmentally friendly, it's got a lot of things going for it. And I think the government seemed to see that and the issues such as swapping a combi boiler in a small terraced house where there's no room to site a cylinder, and it's a little bit awkward to site an air-to-water heat pump as well, perhaps. They see probably the technology as being almost going into about 3 different ways. I suspect new build will end up going on heat pumps, and why not? You're in charge of everything. You're in charge of the fabric, the design of the house. You can allocate space with a hot water storage cylinder.
The emitters, if you want to do underfloor, because it's better.
Absolutely. You haven't inherited a heating system. The pipework can be sized, radiators, underfloor. It can be low temperature heating, of course. So yeah, why not? It seems almost wrong that we don't do that almost, immediately. In existing properties, I suspect it'll be either hydrogen gas-fired boilers or hydrogen gas-fired boilers, perhaps with support from a hybrid heat pump. And perhaps in the early days, it might just be natural gas boilers with a heat pump as well as a hybrid system. That's a pretty regularly used system in Europe. That's a shame that I didn't see that eligible for some of the funding of the £100 million pots they've set aside. It was either heat pumps or nothing, or biomass actually, in fairness, but heat pumps or biomass, but no hybrids. It's not to say that the government have given up on hybrids. They are actually funding a trial this year for 750 heat pump installations throughout this summer. Some of them will be hybrids. It's a pretty good system with a combi boiler. You use a heat pump for 80% of the time, let's say, on the heating system, and the hot water is generated from the combi. And only in the depths of winter do you probably need the boiler to support it. So yeah, I see it going in 3 technology routes: hydrogen with a heat pump as support, or the other way around, heat pump with hydrogen as support, and a full heat pump system. And it's probable that air-to-water heat pump is likely to be the volume one. Ground source is technically, you could argue, more efficient. There's more consistent temperatures below ground, but it is pricey to do, albeit it's a better system. But that's debatable. That's positions can be taken on which is the better system, but the volume will be, I'm sure, in air to water because it's easier to do.
So if you had to put a like a year on it, like full hydrogen, if you did this switch over, would you be able to? I know it's so difficult in it because there's so many different moving parts, but yeah, just if you could say, oh yeah, it would be, I predict it'd be around blank.
Everybody's talking about 2025 as the date when hydrogen-ready boiler enforcement comes in.
Okay.
The earlier it's done, of course, the more you're going to populate the market at 1.5 million a year, roughly, with boilers not paid for by the government, but paid for by the homeowner, because the original one's gone anyhow. 2025 is possible. It's not out of the question. You have to consider, though, some of the smaller runners of boilers. So commercial boilers, they are, the volumes of commercial boilers sold is tiny compared to domestic. So for a boiler manufacturer to design a hydrogen firing commercial boiler where you're only going to sell a few hundred a year, perhaps, rather than a few hundreds of thousands of domestic, there's a lot more investment for that. And you do wonder, would all the manufacturers presently selling commercial boilers, would they bother? Difficult to say. There are ways around it, of course. So rather than big-ish boilers, the problem area is the ones where it's generally up to about a megawatt. So the volume in commercial boilers generally is for the wall-hung modular type, and you gang them together, 2, 4, 6, 8, whatever of them, all on a wall-mounting frame. And combined, you could generate perhaps up to 1,000 kilowatts of heat. So that's probably the way around it. Rather than buying, say, a 700 kilowatt floor standing commercial boiler, you would buy 7 wall-hung 100 kilowatt ones. So there are ways around it, but not every application, of course, could house such an array. But yeah, the considerations would be for commercial. That's probably the more difficult of the ones to hit every application that we have today. Domestically, though, no, I think every boiler manufacturer who's currently selling things in the UK market are either part of a European bigger group who are making them already, or if they're a smaller manufacturer, it won't be that difficult to get into it. Currently, it's difficult to buy the components you would need. So many smaller boiler manufacturers buy on the open market the burner, the gas valves, etc. They don't make their own of those. The larger ones tend to make their own components more so. So we would need the component manufacturers to come on board as well, so they can see a future. But it just needs a clear signpost from the government, let's say, with 5 years' notice, that this will be the date when you can only sell this type of boiler. That will give us enough time and enough reassurance that we're going to get our money back, from it. Because currently everything we've done on hydrogen is pure speculation.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee at all that it's going to happen. We've just tried to create a opportunity, a possibility to contribute to this decarbonisation issue, and hopefully show one of the solutions you could use, to which the government will then say that's a very good idea, let's do that.
So yeah, everything that we've talked about so far, there's still like different paths to take, and there's still a bit of prediction. So as a heating engineer who sat watching this now, what kind of advice do you have for those people to kind of, what should they look for? How can they kind of keep ahead of things that very quickly could change in a direction that would affect their business?
Yeah, it's a very exciting time, actually, the heating industry. Decarbonisation has made it a lot more appealing, that you can actually, still earn a good living, but also, you're playing your part as well. There's an awful lot of talk about skill shortages. And again, one of the reasons the Chancellor visited us was to visit our training centre, be filmed, seeing, the work that manufacturers and training providers do to bring installers up to new skills. I think fundamentally it starts with the heating system itself. And I'm part of a group of manufacturers and other industry members working with the CIPHE on designing a low temperature heating course. And a lot of installers would be fine with it already, but some installers perhaps haven't sized the heating system up for some years. You know, they may just be replacing boilers all the time. So we're in the middle of designing a low temperature heating course, and I think that's where the government would like every home to be, that the heating system within it operates from a low temperature and therefore is suitable for any sort of heat source. So a heat pump is great at low temperatures, so is a boiler though. A boiler would benefit from operating at low temperatures. So we're going to start a training course, which all this is sort of being talked about rather than mandated yet. But it seems to be that if every installer had the knowledge on how to size a heating system, a heat loss calculation, she could ascertain whether an existing heating system is capable of running at a low temperature. Perhaps when the radiators were originally sized, it was when the house didn't have as many additional insulation measures in. So doing a heat loss calculation, sizing the present radiators up, you could see whether they could perhaps run at 60 centigrade rather than 75 centigrade, and therefore set the temperature outlet of the boiler at that point. So get the heating system skills and sizing skills, etc., in place first. Then there is talk, obviously, then about the heating source itself. So the Heat Pump Association have created a syllabus or a scope for 3 different courses. One, which is just a heat pump appreciation course, the generalisation of how a heat pump works, the bits of components within a heat pump. And then you would specialise on either air to water, so you would take the air to water heat pump course, or the ground to water heat pump course, or both, of course, if you wish to. So that would cover you for heat pump installations, and you've also got the added skill of knowing how to size the heating system up. And then, of course, when it comes to boilers, which is the bulk, then the majority of installers are gas safe registered and therefore have the necessary qualifications to fit a gas-fired boiler. The hydrogen element of a gas-fired training qualification would be more or less a bit like the LPG element. So if you fit nat gas, you do an extra day if you fit LPG and gain your qualification there on the different combustion properties, pressures, etc. We foresee hydrogen being much like that, perhaps an extra day, perhaps 2 days of the current gas safety qualification, and that would be probably enough. So to fit a hydrogen boiler certainly requires far less training than it is proposed that a heat pump would do. So those are the 3 I'd follow. You will struggle at the moment to go onto a hydrogen boiler training course because they're not, of course, mainstream, they're not on sale. Yeah. We have been doing a number of online seminars and things like that, short 1-hour bursts of knowledge about what is a hydrogen boiler, how does it work, etc. But nothing manual, nothing in depth, nothing hands-on. But if we get the green light that yes, hydrogen's got a future, then we'll be one of the first to put those around. So at the moment, all that's attainable to an installer is really to consider heat pump courses, perhaps solar thermal, but that seems to have died in recent years, which is a shame. It's a fine technology. And solar PV sort of hogged the highlights for some years, and still does, I guess. But low temperature heating, yeah, if you've got that under your belt as well, this is a new course we're proposing, but there are existing methods and ways of picking up that knowledge, I know. So yeah, those are the 3 things. And most of the time, whilst we support private training providers enormously with product donations and various bits of branding and even going into their centres and helping them run courses, most installers have manufacturers who they work closely with, and virtually every manufacturer I can think of offers brilliant training in great facilities. So yes, keep in contact with your favoured manufacturers. I'm sure they'll be prompting you to come and visit them as soon as they get a course ready.
Yeah, it's important to note that the low carbon training that you put together, that was with heat pump manufacturers, boiler manufacturers, like you said, the CIPHT, so installer organisations, and installers were asked about their opinions as well. So that really is all of the industry, across industry, working together.
Yeah, it's lovely to see. I know boiler manufacturers have been very close for some years. You know, we all get on pretty well with each other, or contribute to the same standards, regulations, ERP requirements, etc. You know, it's a big enough market for us all to run a business in. But to actually join forces with other equipment manufacturers and have a harmonious relationship, have the same objectives and things, was lovely. And I think it was refreshing for BEIS to see competing manufacturers, competing trade associations even, getting in the same room and, you know, helping them, because that's what they want. They haven't the knowledge, of course, and they've been very, very good actually at liaising in recent years with the industry. I know they're going to get their criticisms, but in my 30-odd years of being at Worcester and working with government on various standards and policies, I think it's the closest we have been to some of the civil servants and governmental departments. And BEIS, of course, are really struggling because they've in recent months written reams of guidance for the coronavirus issues. So their resources have really been dragged. But again, they've done that very speedily, very quickly, and it's pretty comprehensive, it's to the point. So the downside of obviously being dragged from their main role is that some of the decarbonisation standards and regulations are likely to slip, I would say. They are still claiming they don't intend to let that happen, but my word, there's only so many hours in a day, isn't there? So
No, it's good. I like that. It's a good note to end on, because we're only going to get there with everybody working together. And I agree. I think we're seeing a lot more that we are, and it's not like, oh, this person's going to say this because they say this, or this person's going to say this because this is it. When you all start working together, that's not an argument.
No, it's a pleasure. It's not always been that way, but yeah, in the last 3 or 4 years where it has been, you know, very strongly stated by government, this is where we're going. Now, you can be part of the solution here, or we will, you know, we'll put in place policies that regrettably will get us there, but might not please you. So join in, and we have, and virtually everybody I've worked with on various things is, you know, seen the benefits of it. So yeah, look to the target. It's got to be good, zero carbon. You know, we want to leave this place better than we found it. So let's get there in a way that we can all still have a business, all still, you know, live without too many complications. And at the end of the day, as long as the consumer gets a good deal, that's everything, because that's the one that we can bring reality to. I don't think the consumer, the governmental departments sometimes keep in mind it's the consumer who is paying for this, and you will not force them to do anything. They will just, you know, put up barriers. You've got to bring them along, and it's the installers who will bring them along if we can bring the installers along. So, you know, everybody will benefit from a harmonious getting together and putting things in place which will help us achieve net zero carbon.
Brilliant. It sounds exciting. Thank you very much for your time, Martyn.
It's a pleasure, Joe.